story that's been unfolding over the last few days. I've reported on it extensively, and the fact is that this was obviously about the death of Prigozhin, or we believe that Prigozhin has died, with Dmitry Utkin, who was his essentially the co-founder of the Wagner group. The body is so badly burned they need DNA analysis. We know they were travelling from Moscow to St. Petersburg. The question is now, what caused it and what happens from here? So essentially all fingers seem to be pointing at Putin. It's very, very interesting, the timing of this. It happened exactly 2 months to the day. 2 months to the day since he launched that failed coup on Moscow. And after he died, Putin actually described his formerly loyal fixer as a talented businessman, this is quite chilling, who had made some serious mistakes. Putin asserting himself very much there as the top dog in Russia, and I think sending a signal that no one should dare challenge him. Well, joining us now, someone who will know far more than me, is Tobias Ellwood, Conservative Member of Parliament and Chair of the Defence Select Committee. Good morning to you, Tobias.
Good morning to you, David.
It's an extraordinary story, this, isn't it? Of course, I never really understood what was going on here because, of course, Prigozhin launched this coup, or attempted coup, by marching onto Moscow. Then it was called off. Then, of course, this deal was brokered by the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko. He didn't go to Belarus, as far as I understand. He then thought he'd got away with it. He was then in Africa. He flew back to Russia, was on a plane, and we believe he's now dead.
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me on. I should make it clear I speak in a personal capacity. You introduced me as chair of the Defence Committee. The committee doesn't have a collective view on this. But you touched on something so important, is to shape the role that the Wagner group had with Putin. Putin realized for some time that the Wagner group had to be brought down. Putin created this private army, placing Prigozhin, his former close friend, in charge to do his dirty work abroad, propping up dictators in Africa, stealing their gold to pay for his own wars. But when Prigozhin, who was so fed up with the conduct of the war in Ukraine, turned his tanks on Moscow, the coup that you spoke of, there was actually no Russian force able to stop him. And all of Russia, including the elites, could then see how weak Putin has become. And this is an absolute no-no for any Russian leader to look weak. Prigozhin then took the key southern city of Rostov-on-Don, cheered through the streets. This is also something that no Russian leader can actually watch and enjoy and not do something about. And it was only this rapid deal of exile in Belarus that stopped this mutiny from absolutely playing out. So Putin had no choice but to somehow respond. You know, make it clear, Prigozhin may be dead, but the damage is now done. I believe this is the beginning of the end for President Putin, because he lifted the lid on how badly this war in Ukraine is actually going. The Wagner group itself, this 25,000 strong group of mercenaries, is arguably the only serious military unit that's operating in Ukraine as well. And their removal from the battlefield in Ukraine will be a huge blow to, Russian competence. And finally, those sanctions across the world are actually beginning to bite. So this is deeply humiliating for Putin. Don't forget, he actually faces presidential elections next year. He'll try and fix them, but in his 23 years in power, this is the most dangerous period. And as I say, it's the beginning of the end, because Russian leaders, once they're shown to exhibit weakness, the Kremlin normally moves pretty swiftly to get rid of them.
And many commentators agree with you. There's a great article in the Telegraph this morning saying short-term displays of brutal strength ensure long-term weakness. So if that is the case, and of course the elite in Russia is sensing that Putin is now fading in his power, the question is, do they decide that actually Putin is a liability for Russia and indeed for them?
Yeah, I mean, this is the big point. It's called Kremlinology. There's actually studies in how the decision-making absolutely takes place. Certainly it's the case that Russian leaders, including Putin, rely on spinning this picture of absolute strength. Remember the pictures of Putin going around topless on a horse, bareback? It's just, this is the sort of image that he tries to portray, the single authoritative decision maker with the full command, the total loyalty of the Russian security apparatus. That has now gone. Prigozhin, killed off all that. Now, clearly, the elites will be circling, working out what to do. When we talk of the elites, we mustn't forget, we're talking of those people that are very rich indeed, the oligarchs and so forth, that can only continue holding on to their power and their money and their assets if there's somebody in charge watching their backs. And if that person is no longer able to watch their backs, they'll be looking for somebody else to take the job over. This makes Putin very dangerous indeed, because, of course, he wants to shore up his position. But widely, if I can just add, this is so dangerous for the international community. Russia is a nuclear-armed state. They're supposed to have a responsible role on the UN Security Council, and now it's acting like a mafia state indeed. So this has huge knock-on consequences for you. You touched on what's going on in American politics. The international rules-based order has entered a very dark era at the moment with the absence of collaboration. Globalization is now dead in its current form. The West isn't as strong as it is to work together to stand up and defend our international rules-based order. And China is watching very, very carefully indeed. President Xi doesn't have many friends in the world. The one friend and ally he had was Putin. He doesn't want to lose his guy in Moscow.
So you make some really good points there. Of course, the Wagner group, there is a vacuum now. We know there are other mercenary groups as well. So, for example, Reddit, also Convoy, for example, we think there are only 200 to 300 men in each of those. I don't know whether that's true. But also, just in terms of that, and something you just said struck me, which is, actually, would it be safer for Putin to remain in power for us? Because the minute he goes, there is another vacuum created.
Well, it's not for us, I think, and it would be wrong for us to determine or call for regime change. This is for the Russian people to recognize and understand. What we need to do is look at the facts. What Putin has done is caused genocide in Ukraine. He's illegally invaded another country, and it's absolutely right for us to stand firm and to defend Ukrainian democracy. And Britain has a fantastic track record in doing so, leading more than other nations. But we need to go further. We're still slightly risk averse in recognizing that, there is an escalator ladder that we need to watch. We don't want this to spill out of control. But ultimately, we do want to conclude this. We want Ukraine to have its own sovereign capability. You were talking earlier about, Britain's economy. That's affected by energy prices that rippled up because of what's going on in Ukraine. Food prices as well, because the grain ships can't get out. It's in all our interest, not just Ukraine's, to conclude and put this fire out in Ukraine.
And if Putin is losing power, as you say, if there is a tipping point now, if people can sense he won't be in power much longer, what does that do to his state of mind when it comes to Ukraine?
Yeah, this is the real worry, and it's right for you to raise this, because he, of course, will then lash out. He'll feel wounded. He'll want to actually show that he's very much tied to this war that Prigozhin actually showed is not going well. Many people questioning, why on earth did we do this to our brother Slavs here? What's the purpose of it, particularly when we're failing and the body bags are starting to come back? So Putin will want to underline and emphasize that he's going to be able to wrap this up quickly. He could do something quite radical, chemical weapons or so forth, or a red flag attack perhaps on a nuclear power station. We need to watch very, very carefully what is actually going to happen here. Or he could open up a new front. Poland is certainly concerned about what the Wagner group, could be utilized to do next. Very dangerous situation for Eastern Europe, one certainly for America, and I'm sure Britain will be having discussions behind closed doors, the back channels, watching carefully what to do in preparation for something quite extreme that Putin will lean on.
And many commentators calling it a failed state. Can I just talk to you, if I may, about Evan Gershkovich? Because today is 150 days to the day since our colleague and Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich was arrested and imprisoned, as you know, in Russia on charges of espionage. He and the US government vehemently deny this. Evan's arrest is the first time since the end of the Cold War that an American journalist has been detained on such charges. and it could mean that he's sentenced to 20 years in a penal colony. Now, in protest at his arrest and detention, leading journalists are campaigning against his capture. There is a hashtag which is on the screen there, I stand with Evan. This is atrocious. Now, clearly, conversations will be going on. What's your take on this?
Well, firstly, really well done for highlighting this, and we need to keep mentioning this as many times as possible. It is absolutely critical that, going back to the relationships, we still have ties, we still have an embassy functioning. It's important that the West stands united in being able to support Evan Gershkovich and calling for his release. I suspect it'll lean on back channels. Some form of deal will perhaps be done, an exchange or in some way, to actually get him out. But this is exactly what Putin wants to do. He wants these leverages. He wants to have some form of power on the West. And that's why people like Evan, who are just simply reporting the news themselves, going against what Putin wants. He does not want the truth out there. But ultimately, we need to keep raising this, mentioning it in Parliament and indeed in Congress as well, placing pressure on our senior government officials to be speaking with Russia and the Russian people around Putin to get him released.
Tobias, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on. That's Tobias Ellwood, their Conservative MP. He is chair of the Defence Select Committee, but obviously speaking in a personal capacity there as well.